forgot you were here.
Everybody's here? No.
I
think it's good, yeah. Yeah, very good.
So maybe you can admit them. I'm going that.
We'll get started in a couple of minutes. Nisim, thank you always for your help. I should be in touch with you. Morris, can you set it up? 1, 2, 3.
I didn't do it.
Kiva did it?
Yeah.
How you doing?
Thank God, I'm good.
Hey, Morris is back and better than ever. Right? Mr. Haber got caught?
Where are you?
No, I'm saying we don't see him down yet.
Why?
No, I'm saying usually he's back. He's here right away. You want to send to the group that we're on?
Yeah, right now.
Here he comes. Here comes Mr. Haber. Okay. Morning, everybody. You'll send to the, oh, done already. Wow. Okay, very good. Okay, we are on Mem Hey Amud Beis. Usually people would click in. We haven't, people don't. If you want to see if people noticed the message or if people read the message, yeah, I presume we're on the right recording place. Good morning, Mr. Haber. Good to see you. Okay, we're on Mem Hey Amud Beis, 45B. Let's what the Gemara here is discussing is, do two people have a right to make a zimun? We said that 3 people have an obligation with 3 men. With 3 people, with 3 people, yes, someone just joined. Thank you very much, Mark. When 3 people join together, 3 people eat together, they start eating together. The Mishnah says that's chayavim l'zameh. If you start with 2 other people, you have an obligation. 3 people start together, they have an obligation to do a zimun. That's the good morning, Avraham. Good morning, Shmuel. Good Good morning, Eric. It's an obligation to go ahead and do the zimun when three people eat together. The Gemara's question is, good morning, Eric, do two people have a right to make a zimun, or two people do not have a right to make a zimun? Meaning, for instance, sometimes in life, you might not be obligated to do something. By the way, I just touched something, Morris, you might want to help us out over here.
Good morning, Rabbi.
Good morning, Mike. What today? In life, sometimes there are certain situations that you're not obligated to do it. And if you want to do it, you can't do it. For instance, Shabbat. You're not obligated to put on tefillin on Shabbat. You're not allowed to put on tefillin on Shabbat. So the question is here, I don't have an obligation, morning, Mike. We don't have an obligation to do zimun when we have two people.
Morning, Rabbi.
Good morning. Do we have a right to do zimun? Could I say nivarech, meaning also nivarech she'achalnu mishalo? To say the bracha of zimun with two, do I have a right to? That's the question of the Gemara. One way I suggested, what's the question? If we look at the zimun as a bracha, right? Nivarech she'achalnu mishalo and baruch she'achalnu mishalo tvachinu, we call it a birkat hazimun. If we look at it as a bracha, so maybe the only way you have the right to say the bracha if you're obligated to say the bracha. If you're not obligated to say bracha, maybe maybe the Chacham didn't give you the right to say that bracha. If you're not obligated to say that bracha. So that's one possibility to learn the question. Or maybe the other possibility is nevarech shachana shalom. If you're only talking to one other person, is the language of zimun inappropriate? Does it fit? Does it make sense to say the word nevarech or nevarech shachana mishalom? It's only when you're calling out to two other people. When you say, let us say a bracha, maybe you need two people to call out to. So there's a discussion in the Gemara whether two people have a right to make a zimun. Mr. Haber, is it clear the question? Okay. So now the Gemara wants to bring...
No, right?
What do you say?
It's no, right? You cannot.
Right. We do not. Correct. But the Gemara is trying to figure it out. The Gemara is trying to see what the law is. Tashma. 2 lines from the top on Mem Hey Yamid Beis. Tashma, let's come in here. Let's prove this. Let's answer this question from the following. It says Nashim. We have a braita. It says Nashim mizamnod la'atzmon. It says women, they can make their own zimun. That's what it says in the braita. And in Shulchan Aruch, in Siman Reish Yud Gimel, meaning what does that mean? Nashim mizamnod la'atzmon. If women ate together, 3 women, 5 women got together. They had a Suda Shlishit together, right? So it says, Nashim mizamnod la'atzmon. It says here in the Shulchan Aruch, it's found in Siman Kuf Tzadik Tes. Kuf Tzadik Tes, Sivav, the Shulchan Aruch says that the women can make their own zimun. That's what the Shulchan Aruch says. Now, they have a right to make their own zimun. You should know, we might not encourage it, even though it says here that women have a right to, because sometimes it might lead to certain, if you tell them they could do the zimun by themselves, maybe they'll start doing other things that they don't have a right to do. So maybe they'll start making minyan and saying kaddish. So therefore, I don't think it's so, not everybody will encourage, even though technically, good morning, technically the halacha allows women to make their own zimun. That's what it says in the Shulchan Aruch. Let's see if the Yalkut Yosef, in the Shulchan Aruch from the Yalkut Yosef, let's see if he has any comment on that. But that would be, technically, women would have the right to make their own zimun. He says women are allowed to make their own zimun, but they're not allowed to make it. But if they have 3 women He says in Yalkut they can make the zimun, but they will not say, first he said, and they will not say the Shem Hashem. That means if they have 10 women, they will not say Nevarech Elokeinu. And then he says, some write nowadays that women will not make their own zimun. And why not? Because since we sometimes when we make a zimun, we do a zimun over a cup of wine. And it's right. It's not, a lot of times if you have 3 people in the house, so it's a special thing to honor the zimun with a cup of wine. You might not be obligated to have a cup of wine, but it's a nice thing to do. And therefore, and it's not nice that women should be drinking wine. How do you like that? And therefore, because it's not nice, I'm very upset when I see women at a bar, at a wedding, and they're at bars, they're drinking. I believe it's not a good thing, my opinion. And maybe by the way, this may be the question of a person: should you have wine if you have a wedding, and you have separate if you're having separate seating at a wedding, should you order wine for the ladies' tables? Right? That's a question that comes up. So based on this, some say don't order wine for the ladies' tables. It's not so nice that's. I'm just suggesting based on this.
Yeah, the ladies prefer champagne, Rabbi.
Okay, I hear you, Yosef at Tzaddik. Good morning, Yosef at Tzaddik. Now, but
Morning.
but if you're at a zimun, but when there's 3 men that are having a zimun, they're supposed to answer to the zimun. Another Moshe Feinstein has a tshuva. A lot of people are not aware of this. If you're having a zimun, you have 3 men in your house. It's Shabbat, and the lady's in the kitchen. It's time to say Birkat Hamazon. You need to call her in. She should come in. She should answer to the zimun. And if there's 10 men, she would answer also Baruch Elokeinu. You should also say Baruch Elokeinu. Have a good day, Sammy. So because he says over here, Noshim that ate with men, Srichot La'anot Zimun. They need to answer, they should answer to the zimun. That's something I don't think people are so aware of, because since the women many people don't have the women making their own zimun, like he brought down a second opinion that women don't make, so therefore sometimes people are not careful that they should answer to the men's zimun. The women should answer to the men's zimun. Okay, back to our Gemara. 2 lines from the top. You got it? Everyone got it? Tashma. Noshim mizamnod la'atzmon. Women make, that's what the Gemara says, right? Women make their own zimun. Mr. Haber, black and white. Is it black and white? Right? Morris, black and white. Kiva, right? It's black and white. They make their own zimun technically. The Gemara continues. You see, Rabbi Vadia discusses the issue of the wine is perhaps why some people don't make their own zimun. And I'm saying the issue is the women's feminist movement, women's lib. That sometimes they take it, they overdo it. Once you give them a right to do certain things, then they sometimes take it to places where they shouldn't be taking it. That's I've heard that as a concern. Why we will not encourage it. Okay. Va'avodim mizamnim la'atzmam. Avodim, servants, slaves that are they're obligated and they were bought by a Jew. And they go to the mikveh and they have brit milah and they're obligated mitzvot like a woman. So they're just like the woman that they can make but they can make their own zimun. They may make their own zimun. And noshim va'avodim kitanim. But if you have a mix, good morning Shmuel Rav. But if you have a mix of women,
Boker
Tov, slaves, and kitanim, and young kids under bar mitzvah, im rasul zamein a mezamnim. You should not have the women, the slaves, the children joined together for zimun. And we're going to see the Gemara is going to explain what Rashi gives us a little heads up. What's the issue? Rashi says it's not modest that the women and the slaves should join in together, that you're going to say that they are, let's say you'll have 2 women and 1 slave, and you're going to say they're going to join together, that meaning, and zimun means that they're all eating together, that you're creating this zimun. So therefore it's a lack of modesty that the women and the slaves are coming together, they're uniting together to create together a zimun. See, when you have three men, so the men created the zimun. So now that the woman answers, it's not that the woman is creating the zimun. It's not that, because to create a zimun, you have to be three people eating together. And we're eating as a group together. So therefore, therefore, we're not going to have two men and one woman. That means you're making that they have to eat together. Rather, you can have, once you have three men, then one woman can answer. But we don't want to have, good morning, Joseph. We don't want to have the uniting together of the slaves and the women, because that's not a modest thing, Rashi says. And also Rashi says an interesting point also, that we're very concerned of the children, that the children shouldn't be molested by the slaves. Mr. Haber, you hear what interesting thing, that the Gemara was concerned about molesting. And if the slaves and the children unite together, they come close to each other in a way. What do you mean they're close? Because they're eating together, they're joining together, and in that fashion, there's a concern that the slaves might take advantage of the children and molest the children. And therefore, we take precautions, and we don't have them eating together in that fashion, uniting. It's a fascinating halacha. I think it's fascinating. And even today, people have to be very careful with children, who the children go with, that there should never be a problem of molestation. There is such a phenomenon out there in the world, even today, a molesting of children. No one should ever know of it. And people have to be very careful who their kids are hanging out with, which adults, if the kids are hanging out with any adults, you have to be very, 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 I'm not getting anybody nervous, but it is something that people need to be smart about. So I'm just mentioning that it's a terrible, terrible thing. Anybody who ever went through such a thing, it has tremendous negative effects on the person. So very terrible effects. So back to our Gemara. So the Gemara says, Vaha meya nashi. The Gemara says 100 women, 5 lines from the top. 100 women, we say that women can make their own zimun. What does that mean? 3 women can make their own zimun. 4 women can make their own zimun. But the status of 3 women, the Gemara understands, it's not an obligation for them to make the zimun. It would seem to be a right. The women have a right to go ahead and make a zimun. So we see the point. 100. So in halachic status, when it comes to zimun, 3 women are equal to 2 men. Meaning to say, 3 women, the Gemara understands, do not have an obligation, do not have a chiyuv to make a zimun. They have a right to make a zimun, even though they have no obligation. So the Gemara wants to prove that so too, to answer our question, do 2 men who have no obligation to zimun, do they have a right to make a zimun? So the Gemara says yes. The Gemara is suggesting yes, at least in the suggestion. Why? Because the Gemara wants to prove from the case, Mr. Haber's idea, case, law, and reason. The case is women. We're using the women as the case to prove that people who are not obligated in the mitzvah can do it. Women are not obligated in the mitzvah of zimun, and yet they can do it. So 2 men are equal to the women regarding obligation. And we see that the women have a right to make a zimun even though they're not obligated. So the Gemara wants to say, therefore, we want to compare that case to the case of 2 men, and 2 men should also have a right to make a zimun. That is the Gemara's comparison at this moment. Is that clear? Joseph, is it clear?
Yeah.
Okay. So Eric, is it clear? That's what the Gemara is comparing the 2 men who are not obligated to the women who are also not obligated. And the Gemara says it's not a good comparison. The case is different and maybe the law is different. Why? Because even though 2 women are not obligated in Zimun, even though 3 women are not obligated in Zimun, but when you have 3 women, it's better than 2 men regarding Zimun. Why is 3 women better than 2 men? And by the way, and that's going to be the halacha. Why? Because when you have 3 women, you have 3 minds coming together. You have 3 people coming together. You have 3 people coming to say a zimun, and 3 people is greater than having 2 people coming to do a zimun. 3 people is a different amount. It's more of a group, and therefore, even if we say that 2 people will not have a right to make a zimun, maybe that's because it's not a real group. It's 2 people. It's a pair. It's not a group. But when you have 3 women coming together, it's true. They might not be obligated to make the zimun, but it's still 3 people coming together. So now the Gemara has created that there's 2 different levels. You could have 2 different types of people that are not obligated in the zimun, but one case is a stronger case to give you the allowance. They have a right to make the zimun. Why? Because it's 3 people coming together. That's what the Gemara says. The Gemara answers, the Gemara says, 100 women regarding obligation. It's like 2 men. And you told me that the women could say their own zimun, and the slaves that also have the status of the women, and they can make their own zimun even though they're not obligated. So the Gemara answers, shiny hatam dikadeyot. There's 3 minds on the deal. So therefore, and Rashi says, why? Because when you have 3 people, then you have the fulfillment of the pasuk of Gadlu Lashem iti uneroma shmo yachtav. The Gemara said, what is the source of zimun? Where do we find this 3, a bracha of 3? So the Gemara says we have a pasuk that says Gadlu Lashem iti. Now what does that mean? Somebody is calling out Gadlu is plural. One person is calling out to 2 people. Gadlu Hashem iti. Let us talk about Hashem's greatness together with me. So therefore, one is calling out to 2. So when you have 3 women, you have fulfilled that one calling out to 2. One lady calling out to 2 other women. And therefore, it is within the realm of Gadul Hashem iti. And therefore, it's appropriate for them to say that zimun. But even though they're not obligated, it's still appropriate. They have a right to say the zimun. Mr. Haver, is that clear or not? Okay, so that's what the Gemara says. So the Gemara says, if that's the case, ihachi ema seifa. Let us try to understand the seifa. Now, Tosfos points out that you do not have. Tosfos says do not have and remove from the text ihachi. Ihachi always means if so. Based on what you just told me, I have a question. Based on your answer, I have a question. But Tosfos says this: Gemara's next question is independent of anything we just said. It's an independent question without the Gemara going back and forth about women. 3 women is better than 2 men. Therefore, Tosfos is going to remove the word ihachi. Look what the Gemara's question ihachi. Ema seifa. I want to show you the seifa. Nashim v'avodim. Women and slaves. Imratzu l'zamein. If they want to make a zimun, ein mezamnin. We say that women and slaves cannot join together to make a zimun. Amaylo. Why can't the women and the slaves join in to make a zimun? Va'ikadeo. You have multiple minds. You have 3 minds coming together. Why can't you have 2 women and 1 slave, or 2 slaves and 1 woman? What's the problem? You have met the threshold of 3 people, and you're telling me you can't have as many women as you have and as many slaves as you have. They can't join in together to make a group to make a zimun. Why not? You can't have 2 women and 1 slave. So the Gemara answers, Shiny Hatam, you know why there is different? Mishum Piritsuta. It's a question of modesty. And therefore, as a question, because of the modesty issue, the law is affected. We don't allow you to go ahead and do the zimun with technically with such a situation. You know, I think it's also, you know, in halacha, technically, you should know, technically a lady could technically say kiddush for another man, right? You have equal obligation, but you will not have a lady in a synagogue go out and make kiddush, lead the kiddush to make a kiddush for everybody in the synagogue. It's not modest for the women to do. So certain times the modesty issue would play a role in the halacha. So too, here we're saying that because it's not modest, that they should unite together to join together in a meal that we're joining. I'm sitting with you in a certain way. The woman is sitting with the slave to come together. So that's not modest, and therefore they cannot recite a zimun, that grouping. However, if the ladies are eating themselves, they can make a zimun. They have a right to make a zimun. Now the Gemara wants to prove we said there's a machloket, and again, and now the Gemara is moving away from the previous discussion at this point, and so the Gemara has not proven whether two people could make their own zimun. The Gemara has not come to a conclusion on the deal whether two people have a right to make their own zimun or not. Now, to stayim, the Rav, the Amar, let's prove Rav is the one that says, Im Rasul Zamnin Im Zamnin. Let's prove that Rav is the one who says if they want to make a zimun, they have no right to make a zimun. Meaning to say, on Memhei Amar Aleph, on 45a, when we introduced the machloket, we introduced the dispute of whether two men have a right to make a zimun, right? We introduced it on Memhei Amar Aleph. If you look back and you turn the page on Memhei, we have right before the first wide line in the bottom, 5 lines, 6 lines from the bottom, it says Rav Rabbi Yochanan. It says there's a machlokas in Rav Rabbi Yochanan. One said if they want to make a zimun, they have a right to, and one of the rabbis says if they want to make a zimun, they have no right. But we did not identify which rabbi said what. We said there's an argument to Rav and Rabbi Yochanan. One rabbi says this, one rabbi says that, but you didn't tell me which rabbi says what. It's like we have a machlokas between Rabbi Avada Yosef and Rabbi Mencia and Abba Shol. One says this and one says that. Who said what? Tell me what did Rabbi Mencia and Shol say and what did Rabbi Avada say? You tell me their argument. Tell me, identify who says what. And it's important to identify because then generally, if you know you have rules, who do you follow in halacha? So if you can identify who said what, then you know who the law is. So we have to know, is it Rav or is it Rabbi Yochanan? Let's try to identify who said what. So that's what the Gemara now is going to do, trying to figure out who's the author of which ruling who's the author of this ruling and who's the author of that ruling. Morris, am I clear? Mr. Haber, am I clear? So the Gemara now says, Tistayim, we're going to prove the Rav, the Amah, Imrotzu, Zamin, Emizamin. We're going to prove that Rav, and you should know, there's a rule. Rabbeinu Hanano says there's a rule that when you have a machlokas in Rav and Rabbi Yochanan, the halacha follows Rabbi Yochanan. That seems to be the general rule. So if we could figure out what Rabbi Yochanan, which is the ruling that Rabbi Yochanan said, then we'll know who the law follows. So that's what we're trying to figure out now. We're trying to figure out what's the law. Because we did not come to a conclusion if two people have a right to say a zimun or not. And now we're going to try to prove who said you can or you can't. And then based on that, we'll know what the halacha is. So now the Gemara says, the Rav who the Amah Imros Lazam the Aim Izam. Let's prove Rav is the one. Why? The Amar of Dimi Amar Yosef, Amar Rav. Rav Dimi Bar Yosef says in the name of Rav, Shlosha she'achlu ka'achat. If we have 3 people that ate together, right? You started a meal together, we washed together, we ate together. Now, once you started the meal together, you have an obligation to say a zimun together, right? You are now locked in because you sat down together. We sat down, we made hamotzi together, and we are locked in. Morris, am I correct? We're locked in together. Now, Yatzai echad mehem l'shuk. One of the members left, went out to the market, to the street, which might not have been a good idea to do during the meal because you didn't do Birkat HaMazon yet, but he went out. He didn't ask the rabbi, should he leave in the middle of the meal or whatever the situation was. He went out to the market. His friend came by and he needed to go out and give his friend something. He went out to the market. One of the 3 went out to the market. And the other 2 are ready to do a zimun. Other 2 guys finished their meal. Now they finished the meal. The 3rd guy is outside. So what do? Korin lo, you call him, you tell him that you want to make a zimun, umazaman alav, and you could count him into the zimun, even if Rashi learns the Gemara, even if the 3rd guy did not come back to you. Let's say you're on your porch, you're eating on your porch, or you're eating in your house, and you open the door, the guy's outside. So it says here that he doesn't have to come, according to Rashi, we have to see the halacha. It says he doesn't have to come back. The Gemara is saying that he could just answer from where he is. He's outside the house. You make Yizim Rabotai Nevari Yishem Hashem Avach Nevarah Shacham Shlo, and he answers the Baruch Shacham Shlo from where he is, and then he'll come back in after he finishes. He'll come back in and he'll do Birkat HaMazon. That's how Rashi understands the Gemara. Others disagree with this opinion. Some say the Ritva says only if the Ra'ah, and the Ritva says no, the guy has to actually come back to the table to say that to answer to the Zimun. Okay, we'll have to see what the halacha says. But there's 2 different ways to understand the Gemara. Rashi said you call him, he answers from where he is. Taima decorum lo. So what did we say? You called him. You needed to call him in order to sound like you needed to call him to make a zimun. But if you wouldn't call the 3rd guy who went out to the street, then you wouldn't be able to make the zimun. Why can't you make the zimun if you don't call him? If 2 people have a right to make a zimun, what do you need to call him? Now you could say one reason why you need to call him because you don't want the other guy to lose out the zimun, right? That's a possibility. But maybe you could say he left. Maybe he left, so maybe I'm not. Maybe I don't have to worry about that. He's missing. He made his decision to leave. But the Gemara wants to prove by the fact that you need to call him. Sounds like that 2 people, you 2 guys that are left in the house, can't do the zimun without him. So we see the Gemara wants to prove from here that 2 people do not have the ability to make a zimun. But if 2 people have the ability to make a zimun, why do you need to call him? Just make the zimun. You hear what the Gemara says? Does everybody hear what the Gemara says? The fact that you need this 3rd guy in order to, it seems to indicate that 2 guys that are left have no ability to make the zimun without him. And the Gemara is going to answer no. Really, no proof. Maybe you could make the zimun without him. What do I need to call him? Because there's a different level of zimun. If you hold that 2 people have a right to make a zimun, we said yesterday that would be a right to do the mitzvah. 3 people have an obligation to do a mitzvah. It's a different role. It's a different mitzvah when you do it because you're obligated to do the mitzvah, or if you do it because you voluntarily do a mitzvah. We say greater is the person who's obligated to do a mitzvah than someone who's not obligated to do a mitzvah. Meaning to say, and we said Tosfos points out somewhere when you have the pressure, you feel, the pressure. You're worried about. I have responsibility, and I have to make sure I do my responsibility. For that pressure that you feel, that's where you're going to get greater reward for that mitzvah. When you have an obligation to do something, it's greater. So therefore, technically, if you go ahead and sit in the sukkah And a woman that sits in the sukkah, the woman gets a mitzvah of sitting in the sukkah, but she's not obligated to sit in the sukkah. You have a greater mitzvah when you're obligated to do it. The man who's obligated is and it's interesting that by the Sfardim, even though the woman gets a mitzvah, she will not say a bracha sitting in the sukkah. She's not obligated. She will not say Ashek Shalom Mitzvotav Tzivanu. But Ashkenazim, she will say the bracha because Tzivanu is going on. The whole Jewish people are obligated in the midst of sukkah. The men are. There was a commandment for the men, for the Jewish people. But so therefore, that's what the Gemara says. No proof. Maybe we're calling the third guy because we want to make sure, because we had an obligation, and we want to make sure to do the mitzvah in that level of obligation and not in the level of reshut, in the level of voluntary. So the Gemara says, Shiny hatam. There it is different. Why is it different? The ikfalu b'chova meikara. They already had an obligation from the beginning, and therefore they wanted to do the mitzvah in that higher level as an obligation. It's a privilege to be obligated to do mitzvot. It comes with it, and it comes with more reward as a result of that. So the Gemara continues. Ela tistayim, let us prove Rabbi Yochanan who the Amma Imros Azam Emazam. Let us prove Rabbi Yochanan is the one who says you cannot recite a zimun with two people. How do we want to prove it, Rabbi Yochanan? The Amma Rabba Bar Chana Rabbi Yochanan. Rabba Bar Chana said in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Shnayim she'ochlu ka'achad. If you have two people that ate together, Echad mehem yotzei b'brikas chaveiro. One of them could go ahead and fulfill his obligation by listening to the bracha of his friend. And we're going to see that generally, if you have two people that ate together, really each person should say their own birkat hamazon. But when would one person say for the other person if the other person doesn't know how to read? Or the person doesn't know how to read, then if you have two people, so you will read it for him. So that's how we'll explain this statement at the moment. So if you have two people that are ate together, they sat together, they ate together. Let's say the other person, let's say it's your mother, and she doesn't know how to say Birkat HaMazon. She doesn't know how to say the words. You say it for her. You read the Birkat HaMazon. A non-religious person comes to your table. You go ahead and you say the Birkat HaMazon. It's interesting that Tosfot has a discussion whether if a person doesn't understand, women, if they don't understand, can they fulfill their obligation by listening to a man saying something in Hebrew when they don't understand, women don't understand it? Because Tosfos wants to say, because I just quoted you, there's a Gemara that says if someone is educated and someone's not educated, the educated person will say the Birkat HaMazon for the uneducated. So Tosfos says maybe that's not a proof that you could say it for the woman, because maybe the uneducated person is someone who doesn't know the text, but he understands the words. Let's say a secular Israeli. A secular Israeli, if you have a secular Israeli at your table, he'll understand the words of Birkat HaMazon. He doesn't know how to say it. He doesn't have the text in front of him. Let's say you don't have any Zemirot booklets in front of you. So therefore, if you would say it for him, that would be fine. Because let's say he doesn't know the words, but he understands the words. But if someone does not understand what you're saying, this is a matter of halachic discussion. Can you be motzi somebody with a bracha when they don't understand what you're saying? That's Tosfos has Tosfos says we need to look into this, something that needs to look into this. It's a real halachic discussion. I think the Ashkenazim are a little bit more lenient on this, but we have to look into the halacha more about it. But it is something that's, that's why therefore it might be an advantage to go ahead if you have, sometimes they have this bencher that if you read the English, the Hebrew comes out, right? What do they call it? Transliterated? What is that called? Is that called transliterated? It's called transliterated, right? When you read the English, the Hebrew comes out. So that would be the ideal, because if the person is saying it, even if they don't understand it, if they say it, they get credit. Meaning to say, if I say it and the other person doesn't understand, since they're not saying it, there's a discussion, could they fulfill their mitzvah by listening? But if they say the Hebrew, by reading English and the Hebrew comes out, when they're saying the Hebrew, someone says the Hebrew and doesn't understand the meaning, he knows I'm saying Berachos HaMazon, but he doesn't know. I bet there were a lot of Jewish people that did not know the meaning of the words of the Hebrew, but they knew how to read Hebrew. They'll get credit for the Berachos HaMazon if they understand, if they say in Hebrew, even if they don't understand what they're saying. Mr. Haber, is that clear? So therefore, that might be a way I would suggest, if you have someone at your table that doesn't know, not educated, best thing is they have one of these benches that they should just read the English and Hebrew comes out. That's what I would, that would be a practical approach towards it. So the Gemara says the following. So we have this case. It says, two people that ate together. Echad mehem yotzei b'chsaveh. We said that one of them could be yotzei by listening to the bracha of his friend, right? Two people ate together. We said if one of them doesn't know how to read, he could listen to you and you'll be motzi him by listening to you. And we were wondering, and that's the statement of Rabbi Yochanan. So now the question is, what is Rabbi Yochanan's contribution? What is he coming to tell us? What is his chidush? Every rabbi, when he says a law, he says a statement, he's coming to tell you something novel. He's coming to tell you something that's not obvious. He's not coming to tell you something that was already said by a braita. The later rabbi is not going to tell you, something that what you already know from a Mishnah, something you know from a braita. You're not eating anything. What are you saying? You have to, if you're saying something that I need to know. You're telling me something I wouldn't know without you, right? So that's what the Gemara wants to know. And we were trying to understand what is Rabbi Yochanan telling us by saying that two people that ate together, one of them can fulfill the mitzvah with the other person. By listening to the other person. Tanina, we learned in the Braita, Shama, v'lo ana. If you heard the bracha of your friend, let's say I say a bracha, and you listen to me recite the bracha, even if you didn't answer amen, but you listened to me reciting the bracha, by the fact that you listened to me saying the bracha, it's as if you said the bracha. It's true. You were supposed to answer amen, but the answering of the amen will not hold you back from fulfilling your obligation of being yotzei, of fulfilling a mitzvah, if you listen to the bracha itself, right? Every time you listen, if someone's saying hamotzi lechem min haaretz, and I'm listening to the bracha hamotzi lechem min haaretz. So what the Gemara is saying, that even if I did not answer amen to the bracha, but I listened to the bracha, I listened to the man saying hamotzi lechem min haaretz, that's as if I said the hamotzi. And I could eat as a result of that. From the Shulchan Aruch in Reish Yud Gimel Sif Beis, the Reish Yud Gimel Sif Beis, it says the following: the person who says that if you say a brachat for somebody else as well, even if the person did not answer amen, they get credit. It's as if they said the bracha. And therefore they could eat the bread based on that, they heard the bracha from the other person. That's what it says, Morona Machaber in the Shulchan Aruch. But definitely the Chafetz Chaim says the Chatchila, besides the fact there's a mitzvah to answer amen on any bracha that you hear from a Jew, there's definitely more of an obligation to hear amen, to say amen, a bracha that you have in mind to fulfill from someone else. Because what you're doing is, when you say amen, you are saying, I agree, amen. It's true, I agree to the fact that what the person is saying. The person says, Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu melech haolam hamotzi lechem min haaretz. You recognize that God is the one who brings bread from the ground? Amen. You say amen. Yes, it's true. That's what the amen is doing. It's very important. You're saying you're agreeing with what the person is saying. Okay. Let's continue in the Gemara. So the Gemara says, my kamash malan. What's the chidush that one could say a bracha for somebody else? We know that one could say a bracha for someone else. So the Gemara says, for Amar Rav Zera said, morning Avi. Rav Zera says, Loma she'ein birkas hazimun beinehem. You know what Rabbi Yochanan is coming to tell us? This is what Rabbi Yochanan is coming to tell us. When you have two people coming to eat together, and one of them does not know how to read, one of them could say the bracha for the other one, but the only thing that you could do for the other guy is say the birkat hamazon for the other guy. But you cannot join in to say a zimun together. The only thing you could do together is one for the other is I'll read for you, I'll read it to you, you answer amen, you listen to the bracha. Even if you don't answer amen, you get credit, fine. But when it comes to, can I say a zimun? Can I invite you to the Varech Shachanu? That I don't do if I have two people. So that's the chidush, and that's what Rabbi Yochanan is coming to teach us. Tistayeg. So that's the proof, and that's what Rabbi Yochanan is going to tell us. And the law follows Rabbi Yochanan that two people will not recite a zimun together. Amalei Rava. Rava says, Amalei Rava bar Huna Rav Huna. Rava, the son of Rav Huna, says to Rav Huna, for Rabbanan, the rabbis, the Atumim Arava, the rabbis that came from Eretz Yisrael, Omri, you know what the rabbis from Israel, the rabbis that came here to Bavel, to Babylon from Israel, as you know, there was we know about New York and Washington, and there was Israel and Bavel. There was a constant, people would be going study. If people lived in Israel, would go to Bavel. From Bavel, would go to Israel. The rabbis would go back. Many times, there's two great places of Torah of the two great Jewish communities. Like you have America and Israel. So you had Israel and Bavel. So the rabbis came back from Bavel, Marava in the west, that's Israel. Amri, and you know what they said? The rabbis from Israel said, Imrotzu l'zamein mizamnin. The rabbis from Israel said that if you want to recite a zimun with two people, you have a right to recite a zimun with two people. Now, who was the author? Now, the rabbi said it from Israel. Now, who was the big rabbi in Israel? Who was the Chacham HaGadol in Israel, like the chief rabbi in Israel? Was Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan was the big rabbi in Israel. Being that Rabbi Yochanan was a big rabbi in Israel, and the rabbis are coming from Israel, and they're reporting that they say you could say a zimun with two people, would seem to be that that's the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, because they're coming from the Holy Land. And who's the chief rabbi in the Holy Land? Is Rabbi Yochanan. The big rabbi. And if they're saying you can do zimun, most probably they heard of Rabbi Yochanan. So if that's the case, we just concluded a moment ago. The Rabbi Yochanan says that you're not allowed to make a zimun if you have two people. But now that they're coming from the Holy Land and they're saying you can do a zimun, sounds like two people could do a zimun. It sounds like Rabbi Yochanan holds they're allowed to. And a moment ago you said Rabbi Yochanan says you cannot. So the Gemara says, that's the Gemara's question. My laugh, probably the Shamilu Rabbi Yochanan, was probably they heard it from the great Rabbi Yochanan. So the Gemara says, no. The Shamilu may Rav. These rabbis heard it from Rav before he went to Bavel. Rav was a great rabbi as well. He was out there in that big league of Rabbi Yochanan. As you see, Rav and Rabbi Yochanan, they argue with each other. They're like, Ravadi Yosef and Metzin Abashol. These are colleagues. These are people of the similar, they're in the same league. They're in that major leagues. And before Rav spent years in Israel, and eventually he left Israel to go to Bavel. So the rabbis that were coming from Israel, that came to Bavel, that came from Israel to Babylon, and they're saying you have a right to go in and do zimun, because they are following the opinion of Rav, and they heard it from Rav. When Rav was living in the Holy Land, they heard Rav say that you have a right to make a zimun. And that's why those rabbis when they're coming to Bavel, that's why they say you could do it, because they're following Rav, not Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan said you will not have a right to make a zimun. So the Gemara says, lo, the Shamir Lumerav, they heard it from Rav, Mikamei Dinochas Bavel, before Rav went to Bavel. That's where they heard it from Rav, and therefore they come and they say they have a right to say a zimun, but Rabbi Yochanan holds they cannot say a zimun. And that's our conclusion. Just want to end with the top Tosfos. The first line of the top Tosfos, I think it's very important to look at the top Tosfot. You have it? Top Tosfot, right-hand corner, the top of the page. The headline of the Tosfot is V'hameid Nashi Ketrei Gavi Dami. 100 women, Mr. Haber, you have it? Top Tosfot on the right side. 100 women are like 2 men, right? We said 100 women are like 2 men regarding obligation in Zimun. 2 men are not obligated, and 100 women are not obligated. But 100 women have a right to say a Zimun, and our question was, do 2 men have a right or not? So Tosfos says, L'Inyud Kibbutz Tfilah, they're like 2 men, L'Inyud Kibbutz Tfilah, regarding gathering for a minyan. 100 women are like 2 men. That means to say, women do not have a right to make a minyan. They do not, just like 2 men cannot make a minyan. 100 women can't make a minyan and start saying Kaddish, Kedusha. Le'in kol davar shebasara. And anything that we require 10 people, Kaddish, Kedusha, Kriyat Torah, they cannot go ahead and create such a thing. So that's I just wanted to just point that out, that Tosfot, some people, sometimes you have people want to know where is the source for such things. Here it's clear in Tosfot, black and white, women cannot make a minyan, and so on and so forth.
Rabbi,
Okay? Yes.
regarding to that, where does it mention in the Torah that you cannot make minyan or kedusha?
So it's very good. The source of minyan that you need 10 men. It's from the psukim when it talks about the 10 meraglim. It was talking about men, and and therefore based on the psukim, most probably because it's talking about men, I presume that might be the reason why we don't say it refers to women. There might be other sources as well, but the psukim talk about it was 10 men over there that said bad about the land of Israel. It was 10 men. And they learn out from that psukim over there about a minyan.
What's that to do with the minyan? It's like
But there's a limit.
apples and oranges is like the same thing, the same, they're growing on tree, but
Right.
they are
different.
different.
We have to see I have to take out the full source, but it has to do with over there. It's connected to over there. We have to see. Remind me. I'll look up the full source on that, Yosef. The whole, maybe because it's called an Eidah, or maybe it's called an Eidah, or whatever, maybe, and we see from over there an Eidah, a group, whatever. We have to look it up. I'll try to look it up. I'll get back to you. All right? Have a great day, everybody. All the best.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Welcome.
Thanks, Rabbi. Have a good day.
Thank you. Have
Have a great day, everybody.
Rabbi.
Take care. Good to see everybody. Take care. Have a great day, Mr.